I need you to
glad we
know
finally got
something
together
before I
for
tell you
coffee.
this
It's been way
story.
too long, right?
I am
You know, I was
54
telling
years
my friend
old.
about you
I
just
have built
last-
things. Real things. Things you can walk inside. Things made of glass and steel and careful thought. I have raised a daughter who is now taller than me and far wiser. I have been married. And I have been divorced. And I have sat in rooms full of powerful people and felt completely at ease. I am not someone who gets rattled. I am not someone who loses her footing. And yet, there is a woman. And she changed, quietly, without asking my permission. Every single thing I thought I knew about myself. If that sounds like something you understand, stay with me. This might take a little while, but I promise you, it's worth it. Hearts. Her name is Maya Oduya. She is 29 years old, which means there is a 25-year gap between us. A fact I am aware of. A fact I have turned over in my hands 1,000 times like a stone I can't put down. She has warm, dark brown skin and natural hair she wears pulled up in a loose knot when she's working, with 2 or 3 coils always escaping, falling against her temples. She has a small scar above her left eyebrow. She laughs from her whole chest, not her throat. I noticed all of this on a Tuesday morning in October when I was running late and my elevator was stuck. I work on the 14th floor of the Meridian Tower in Midtown Atlanta. I have worked there for 11 years. The building has 4 elevators, and I have never once, in 11 years, paid attention to who maintains them. That Tuesday, Elevator B stopped between the lobby and the 2nd floor. It opened its doors onto a service corridor I'd never seen before. A narrow hallway with exposed conduit pipes, and a flickering fluorescent light, and a utility cart parked against the wall. And crouching beside the elevator panel, with a diagnostic tablet in her hand, and a pair of safety glasses pushed up onto her forehead, was Maya. She looked up. I looked down. And here is what I remember. I noticed, in that exact moment, that her eyes were very dark and very still. The kind of eyes that don't look at you the way most people do, skimming the surface, scanning for useful information. She looked at me the way you look at something you're genuinely trying to understand. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then she said, completely calm, "The sensor has been tripping since Monday. I can have you moving in about 4 minutes. If you need to use the stairs, they're at the end of this corridor on your left." She did not call me ma'am. She did not apologize. She stated facts, offered options, and went back to her panel. I took the stairs. I was 3 minutes late to my meeting. I sat through 45 minutes of discussion about a commercial development in Buckhead, and I contributed exactly nothing. My project manager asked me twice if I was all right. I told her I hadn't had enough coffee. That was a lie. What I couldn't tell her, what I couldn't tell anyone, including myself, was that I was sitting in that conference room trying to figure out why a 3-second look from a woman I had never met had made my chest feel like something inside it had shifted. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand how ordinary it was, how there was no music, no lightning, no perfect choreography of fate. There was a broken elevator, a narrow corridor, a woman doing her job, and me, suddenly, inexplicably, completely off balance. If you're listening to this and something about it already feels familiar, that quiet, inexplicable feeling of being caught off guard by someone you weren't supposed to notice, maybe this story is about you too. Stay with me. I didn't see her again for 6 days. In those 6 days, I told myself exactly what you would tell yourself. Nothing happened. You were tired. You were distracted. You've been working too hard, and you're at an age where your body does strange things, and that's all it was. A momentary blip, neurological noise. I believe the technical term is, I lied to myself. On the following Monday, I came in early, 45 minutes before my usual time. The lobby was quiet. Just the security desk and the hum of the ventilation system and the faint smell of industrial floor cleaner that I had never noticed before, but would come to notice every single morning, for months. She was at the elevator panel again. A routine inspection this time. Clipboard, checklist, moving with the kind of unhurried focus that people only have when they genuinely don't mind the work they're doing. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. She finished a note on her clipboard, looked up, and recognized me immediately. Elevator B again? Just waiting for whichever one opens first. I said. She nodded and went back to her checklist. I stood there. The elevator arrived. I got in. As the doors were closing, she said, without looking up from her clipboard, "B's fully operational. You don't have to avoid it." The doors closed. I stood in that elevator for 14 floors and thought about nothing else. She had noticed that I'd been taking a different elevator. She had paid attention to me. Some things begin so quietly that by the time you hear them, they've already been speaking for a while. Coffee on the 17th floor. Getting to know someone is just a series of small doors. You open one. You wait. I want to ask you something. Have you ever caught yourself inventing reasons to be somewhere? Not lying, exactly. Not consciously manipulating. Just finding yourself repeatedly in the same general vicinity as a person and telling yourself it was coincidence? I started taking my lunch breaks on the 17th floor. The 17th has a small lounge that most people in the building don't use. It's a leftover from when that floor was half occupied, and nobody from my firm goes there because it requires taking a separate elevator bank. But it has a good view of the Midtown skyline and a decent coffee machine, and the maintenance crew's break room is one hallway over. I told myself I went there for the view. I am not proud of this. The first 2 times I went, she wasn't there. The third time, I was sitting at the window with my coffee and my laptop, pretending to review structural notes on a residential project in Virginia Highland, when I heard the door at the end of the hall open, and then footsteps, work boots, unhurried, and then the particular sound of the coffee machine being used by someone who knew exactly which buttons to press. A few minutes later, Maya appeared in the doorway of the lounge. She had a mug of black coffee and a small paper bag that turned out to contain, as I would later learn, exactly 3 ginger snap cookies. Her Tuesday lunch, a tradition she'd held since her first week at the building. She saw me. I saw her see me. There was a beat, the kind of beat where both people are briefly aware that something is happening, but neither is going to acknowledge it. And then she said, "You found the 17th. "The view's better up here," I said. "It is," she agreed. And she sat down at the table across from the window, not next to me, but close enough to talk. "You're the architect on 14. Senior partner, Caroline Voss, Maya Oduya, building systems." We shook hands across the table. Her hand was warm, and the handshake was direct. Not performative, not deferential, not the slightly too firm grip people use to make a point. Just contact, just 2 people acknowledging each other. We talked for 22 minutes. I know it was 22 minutes, because when I looked at my phone, only because I had a 2:00 call I couldn't miss, I was shocked that so much time had passed. We had talked about the building, about the recent renovation of the lobby that Maya thought had sacrificed function for aesthetics, a critique I found so specific and correct that I laughed out loud. About Atlanta. She was from Decatur originally, had gone to Georgia State, had worked in commercial building maintenance for 4 years, and was studying for her mechanical engineering license. About the view from the 17th floor, which she said was better than the roof, because on the roof, you couldn't hear the city, just the wind. I don't know what she knew about me by the time I stood up to leave. I know what I knew about her. She was precise. She was funny in a dry, offhand way that snuck up on you. She had strong opinions about things she'd actually thought about, and 0 opinions about things she hadn't. A quality so rare that I found myself slightly disoriented by it. She ate 3 ginger snap cookies every Tuesday, and she didn't offer me one, and I liked her for that. She also, at no point in 22 minutes, looked at me the way that people sometimes look at me, measuring the suit, the age, the title. She looked at me the same way she'd looked at me in that service corridor, trying to understand. Just that. I went back to my office. I sat in my chair and looked at the Buckhead skyline and thought, with something that I can only describe as alarm, I want to talk to her again. Not in a casual, collegial, pleasant acquaintance way. In the way where you're already, while it's still happening, storing the details. The ginger snap cookies, the handshake, the comment about the lobby renovation. The specific way she said function for aesthetics, like it was a sentence she'd been waiting to say to someone. I was 53 years old at the time. I had been attracted to men my whole life. I had been married to one for 14 years. had dated a few after the divorce. I was not a person who thought of herself as someone with questions, unresolved territory, unexplored maps. And yet, here I was, storing the details. From what city are you listening to this right now? I wonder sometimes if you're somewhere cold, somewhere with a window, somewhere you came to be alone for a little while. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. The Tuesday lunches became a thing, not by design, or not by spoken design. The second time it happened, she was already there when I arrived. The third time, she looked up when I walked in and said only, "Coffee machine's acting up again," and pushed her mug toward the middle of the table in a gesture that I understood to mean, "I already checked. It's fine now. We talked about different things every week, but the same underlying thing every time, what we thought about the world." She had a way of asking questions that weren't small talk questions. Not, "How was your weekend?" but, "Do you think the city is building for the people who live here or for the people they want to attract?" Not, "Have you always been in architecture?" but, "What made you stay? What made you stay?" Nobody had asked me that in years. I had to think about it. I told her the truth, that I had stayed because buildings were the only things I knew of that lasted long enough to matter, that you could do work in this world and it would be erased by time or circumstance or someone else's agenda. But a building, a real building, one that was thought about rather than just constructed, could stand long after you were gone and still be doing exactly what you designed it to do. Still giving people a place to be. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's why I do what I do too. The buildings already exist. Someone has to make sure they keep working." She said it like it was obvious. Like there was no hierarchy between designing a building and keeping it alive. I thought about that for the rest of the week. I thought about a lot of things she said for the rest of the week. And I noticed, with the analytical part of my brain that monitors things even when the rest of me is trying not to, that the feeling I was carrying around wasn't the comfortable warmth of a new friendship. It was something more restless than that. Something that made me more careful about what I wore on Tuesdays. Something that made me save a funny article about Atlanta zoning laws because I thought she'd have a take on it. Something I didn't have a name for yet, or more accurately, something I wasn't ready to name. The scariest moment isn't when you realize you feel something. It's when you realize you've been feeling it for a while and didn't let yourself know. My daughter's name is Phoebe. She's 28, lives in Portland, works for an urban planning nonprofit, and calls me every Sunday at exactly 7 in the evening, which I find both endearing and slightly unnerving, because she did not inherit that kind of clockwork reliability from me. She also has, and I say this with love and a fair amount of awe, a gift for asking the one question you were hoping she wouldn't. In November, on one of those Sunday calls, she asked me, "Mom, are you seeing anyone?" I told her no. "Is there anyone you're thinking about seeing?" And I said no again, very quickly. Too quickly. Phoebe said nothing for about 4 seconds, which is a very long time on the phone with someone who knows you. "Okay," she said finally. "Just okay." She didn't push. She never pushes. She just plants the question like a seed and then moves on, and you're the one left wondering why it's still growing. I'm telling you about Phoebe because she was the first person who almost knew. Not because I told her anything, I hadn't at that point admitted anything to myself, but because her question created a small crack in the wall I'd been building. And through that crack, a little light got in. Hearts. The night it happened. The night something shifted from possibility to something I could no longer argue myself out of. Started with a building emergency on the 8th floor. It was a Thursday in late November. 7:30 in the evening, long after most of the building had cleared out. I was still at my desk because I had a presentation the following morning for a project I wasn't satisfied with, and the only way I ever resolve that particular dissatisfaction is to sit alone with it until something unlocks. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The floor was quiet. Then the fire alarm on 8 started. Not a building-wide alarm, just a localized sensor, later traced to a malfunctioning HVAC unit triggering a heat detector. The building's emergency protocol required a physical inspection before the alarm could be cleared. Security paged maintenance. I went down to 8 because I am constitutionally incapable of staying out of anything that happens in a building I work in. I know this about myself. Maya was already there when I stepped off the elevator, tablet in hand, work vest over a gray thermal shirt, hair down. I'd never seen her with her hair down before. It was longer than I'd expected, and she'd tucked it behind one ear. And I registered this with the particular awareness of someone who is paying more attention than they should. She looked up, saw me, and did not seem surprised. "You didn't have to come down." "I know," I said. "What is it?" "HVAC heat sensor near the east stairwell. Probably dust accumulation on the detector. I just need to pull the panel." I stood back and watched her work. There is something about watching a person do their work well, really well, with that particular quiet fluency that comes from genuine understanding, that I find deeply compelling. I have felt it watching a good contractor on a job site, watching a structural engineer walk through calculations, watching my daughter do her work. It's the quality of someone being fully themselves. Maya with a panel open was exactly that. She moved without hesitation. She read the system the way I read blueprints. Not sequentially, but spatially, taking in the whole thing at once. Her hands were steady. She found the fault in about 4 minutes, cleared it, ran the diagnostic twice. "That's it," she said. "Sensor flagged. We'll replace the unit in the morning." She closed the panel, made the note on her tablet, turned around. And then, because I had apparently made absolutely no progress in managing myself, I said, "Do you want to get coffee? There's a place on the corner that's open till 9. It came out completely normally, like a colleague asking another colleague a completely unremarkable question. Maya looked at me for a moment. "It's cold out," she said. "I know." "Okay," she said. "Let me put this stuff away." Hearts. We went to a small coffee place on West Peachtree called Groundwork. It had mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and the kind of deliberately low lighting that makes everything feel more honest than it would in bright fluorescence. We sat at a corner table. We talked for 2 hours. I don't mean we made small talk for 2 hours. I mean we had the kind of conversation that happens when two people finally stop being professionally polite and start being themselves, the kind where you find yourself saying things you didn't know you thought until you were in the middle of saying them. She told me about her family, her mother who had emigrated from Nigeria to Atlanta in 1989, and had worked as a home health aide for 20 years, and had very specific and non-negotiable opinions about the correct way to make jollof rice, 2 of which involved timing, and 1 of which Maya described as completely unrepeatable science, about her younger brother who was studying environmental engineering at Georgia Tech, about how she had wanted, briefly, to be an architect herself, and had changed direction not because she couldn't do it, but because she wanted to be closer to the physical reality of buildings, the wiring, the pressure, the systems that keep the whole thing alive. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in a long time, about how my marriage had ended, not in drama, not in betrayal, but in a quiet fading, the way a signal loses strength as you drive further from the tower. About how the divorce had been the right thing and still the hardest thing, because right and easy have almost nothing to do with each other. About how Phoebe had handled it with a composure that made me realize my daughter was going to be a better person than me, and how I felt about that, proud and slightly humbled and entirely glad. Maya listened. Not the way people listen when they're waiting to respond, the way people listen when they actually want to understand. At some point, I couldn't tell you when exactly, I became aware that the conversation had shifted into a frequency that wasn't quite professional. The space between us had changed, not physically. Something else. The quality of her attention, the way I was choosing words more carefully than usual, not to be impressive but to be accurate, because she was the kind of person who would notice the difference. At 8:45, the coffee shop started stacking chairs. We walked out together into the November cold. Midtown at night is a particular kind of alive. The bass from a bar somewhere on the next block, headlights on wet asphalt, the distant sound of a MARTA train. We stopped at the corner where she would turn for the parking deck. "This was good," she said. It was, I agreed. She looked at me for a moment, that same look, the one that was trying to understand something. "Caroline." "Yeah." "I'm going to ask you something, and you don't have to answer." I waited. "What are we doing?" And I stood on that corner in the cold, with the MARTA train somewhere in the distance, and I thought about all the very reasonable, very plausible answers I could give. Instead, I said, "I'm not sure, but I don't think I want to stop." Maya nodded slowly, like that answer had landed somewhere specific. Okay, she said, then we don't stop. She turned and walked toward the parking deck. I stood on the corner until I couldn't see her anymore. Then I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat for 15 minutes without starting the engine. And I let myself, finally, know what I had been not knowing for weeks. If this story is reaching something in you, something you've kept quiet, something you haven't had words for yet, you're not alone. There are more of us than you think. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this one. Knowing is not the same as deciding, but it's the necessary beginning of everything that comes after. I want to be honest with you about what happened after that night, because I think if I skip this part, I'm not really telling you the truth. And the whole point of this is to tell you the truth. What happened after that night was nothing good. Not in what was between Maya and me. That was, if anything, becoming clearer, warmer, more itself. What I mean is that what happened inside me was not the simple, uncomplicated joy you might expect from someone who has finally found something real. What happened inside me was fear, significant, thoroughly unpleasant fear. I am 54 years old. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia in the 80s. I had a mother who used the word feelings the way some people use the word weather, as something external and largely uncontrollable that you acknowledged briefly before going inside. I had a religious education that I largely set aside in my 20s, but that left certain textures on the walls of my thinking that don't come off cleanly. I had a life that had been arranged, for decades, in a particular shape, a recognizable shape, a shape that made sense to people. The shape I had built did not include this. So I did what a 54-year-old woman with a well-developed sense of self-discipline does when she is afraid. I got very busy. I traveled to 3 client sites in 2 weeks. I worked late. I was, professionally, impressive. I did not go to the 17th floor on Tuesday. Maya texted once, 10 days after the night at groundwork. It said simply, 17th floor coffee machine is fixed, in case you were wondering. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. I am not proud of those 2 weeks. Hearts. The person who finally said what needed to be said was Phoebe, not because I told her. I still hadn't told her anything, not in words. But on our Sunday call in December, she said, in the same easy tone she uses for everything, "Mom, you sound like you're carrying something heavy. You don't have to tell me what it is, but I want you to know that whatever it is, it doesn't change anything about who you are to me." I got very still on the phone. "What makes you say that?" I asked. "Because you've sounded like this before," she said. "Right before something true happened, right before you left the firm in 2009 and started your own practice, right before you told me about the divorce. You get very contained, like you're keeping yourself in a smaller space than you need." I had to put the call on mute for about 30 seconds because I was not going to cry on the phone with my daughter in the middle of a Sunday evening. I absolutely was not. When I came back, I said, "There's someone I've been spending time with. Okay, it's complicated. Most things worth anything are. She works in my building." Silence. Then, "Oh," said Phoebe, and there was something in that one syllable, not surprise exactly, something more like recognition. "Mom." "How long have you known?" "Known what?" "That women were also, that you could also feel." "Phoebe, I'm just asking." I looked out the window at the Atlanta night. The lights of the city, which I have looked at 10,000 times, and which I designed things to be part of. "I don't know," I said. "I think maybe I don't know. I don't know how to answer that." "That's an answer," she said gently. We talked for another hour. She didn't ask for details. She didn't ask questions I wasn't ready for. She just stayed. On the phone, in the conversation, present. When we hung up, I sat with the specific feeling of having been seen by someone who loves you, which is both a relief and a kind of undoing. Because once someone has seen you clearly, it becomes much harder to hide from yourself. Hearts. I went to the 17th floor the following Tuesday. Maya was there. She looked up when I walked in. She did not say anything. She did not make the 2 weeks easier by pretending they hadn't happened, and she did not make them harder by demanding an explanation. She just looked at me with that clear, still gaze that I had come to think of as entirely hers. I sat down. I said, "I'm sorry I disappeared." "Okay," she said. I was scared. "I know," she said. "I figured that's what it was. It wasn't about you. I know that too." She said it without edge, without accumulated grievance, without any of the punitive patience that people sometimes deploy when they want you to know you've made them wait. She said it like information, like someone stating a fact that had already been accounted for. I looked at her. "Maya, I'm 54 years old. I know. I've never..." I stopped. Started again. "I haven't done this before." "Done what?" she asked. And there was something in the way she asked it. Not naive, not oblivious, just specific. She wanted me to say it, so I said it. Felt this way. About a woman. Silence. Maya turned her coffee mug slowly with both hands, a gesture I recognized as hers. Something she did when she was thinking. "What are you going to do with that?" she asked finally. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel it." She nodded. Outside the window, Atlanta was its usual indifferent beautiful self. The glass buildings, the afternoon traffic, the sky that changes color 4 times between 3 o'clock and dark. "I'm not going to rush you," Maya said. "But I'm not going to disappear either, just so you know where I am. Just so you know where I am." I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. There is a generosity in it that still makes me catch my breath, the willingness to hold space for someone else's becoming without making your own patience a form of pressure. It is a quality I associate with people who have done real interior work. People who have learned to trust their own timing enough that they can extend that trust to someone else. She was 29, I was 53, and she was the one teaching me that lesson. If this story is touching something you've never said out loud, you don't have to say it yet. Just let yourself hear it. That's enough for now. And if you want more stories like this one, stories that don't look away, subscribe. We're building something here. There's no expiration date on becoming who you are. You can begin at any age. You can begin right now. January in Atlanta is deceptive. People from the north always underestimate it. It doesn't have the drama of a northeastern winter, no blizzards, no theatrical snowdrifts. But it has a cold that gets into the joints of buildings, that makes the steel contract and the seals around windows work harder. That requires, as Maya once explained to me in detail I found inexplicably fascinating, a different kind of attention than any other season. By January, things between us had found a shape, not a named shape. Not a shape with an agreed-upon label or a conversation where we had defined its edges, but a shape. Tuesday lunches, always. Texts that were sometimes about buildings and sometimes about nothing in particular, and sometimes about things that made me laugh out loud in empty conference rooms. A dinner in Inman Park in December that we didn't call a date, but that was, in all ways that mattered, a date. 2 hours at a small Italian place. Good wine, a walk along the Beltline afterward, where she pointed out infrastructure things I had never noticed, and I pointed out design things she had never noticed, and we were, both of us, genuinely entertained by each other. I told 2 people. Phoebe, who said only, "I'm glad, Mom." And my oldest friend, Dana, who I have known since architecture school, who said, after a very long pause, "I need you to say that again." And then, after I did, Caroline, "Are you happy?" And I thought about it honestly, which meant thinking about all the fear and the confusion and the vast amount of interior renovation that had been required in the past several months. And then I said, "Yes, I think I actually am." "Then that's everything," Dana said. "That's the whole answer." I hearts. On a Friday in late January, Maya called me from the roof. Not on the phone. She sent a text that said, "Come up to the roof if you have 10 minutes. Bring a coat." I came up. The Meridian Tower roof is not a designed space. No terrace furniture, no decorative elements, just the mechanical units and the access stairs and the view. But the view is extraordinary. On a clear day, you can see the entire Atlanta skyline from the north side, and in the distance the soft blue outline of the Appalachian foothills. and in the foreground the grid of the city, all its organized ambition laid out like a blueprint. Maya was standing at the north railing, hands in the pockets of her work vest, looking at the skyline. She had her hair down again. The January wind was moving it, and she hadn't done anything about it, which I found enormously endearing. I stood beside her. We looked at the city together for a little while without talking. Then she said, "I want to tell you something, okay? I've been thinking about what we're doing, about what I want from it, and I don't need you to have a complete answer right now. I know you're still working some things out. But I want you to know what's true for me." She turned to look at me. The January sky behind her was a particular shade of pale blue that I will never see again without thinking of this moment. "What's true for me," she said, "is that I've been happier since I met you. I'm not saying that to put pressure on you. I'm saying it because it's true. And I think you should know what's true." I looked at her. 25 years between us. 25 years of different experiences, different formations, different understandings of the world. She had grown up in a generation that had had different frameworks available to it. Not easier, not without struggle, but different. She had access to language I had to grow into. She had assumptions about herself that it had taken me until my 50s to begin to form. And she was standing on a rooftop in January, hands in her pockets, telling me simply what was true. "Maya," I said. "Yeah. I don't have a complete answer. You're right about that. I know. But I stopped. Found the words. I want to keep going. Whatever this is, I want to keep going toward it." She looked at me for a long moment, then she turned back to the skyline. "That works for me," she said. And we stood on the roof together in the January cold, looking at the city that we both in our different ways had given our working lives to. The city that holds all its people, their histories, their reinventions, their quietly extraordinary loves, inside buildings that someone had to design and someone had to keep running. I thought about what she'd said weeks ago. I wanted to be closer to the physical reality of buildings, the wiring, the pressure, the systems that keep the whole thing alive. I thought about how I had spent my career thinking about structures, about what makes something stand, about load and tension and the relationship between form and function, about how the most beautiful buildings are the ones where you can't see the work it takes to hold them up. And I thought, maybe that's what this is. Maybe this is me at 54, finally paying attention to the systems underneath, the things I hadn't let myself look at, the wiring I'd ignored, the pressure I'd rerouted around myself instead of through. Maybe this is what it looks like when a person finally stops being only a structure and starts being a place someone can actually live. Hearts. I don't know exactly what we are yet. I know we have dinner on Thursdays, usually somewhere in the old 4th Ward or Ponce City Market, and that she orders whatever sounds interesting on the menu, and I order whatever she recommends, and I'm almost always glad I did. I know that she has been to my apartment twice, and both times she has looked around at my book collection with the focused attention of someone doing a diagnostic, reading the titles the way she reads building panels. I know that I have met her brother, briefly, at a coffee shop in Decatur, and he shook my hand with Maya's exact same direct grip and said, entirely seriously, "She talks about your building like it's a person she respects." And Maya said, "Kemi," warningly, and he just smiled. I know that Phoebe is coming to Atlanta in March and has already, preemptively, said that she'd like to meet her. I know that I am, at 54, in the middle of something I cannot fully describe. Something that doesn't have a clean name yet, something that requires me to be braver than my history has prepared me to be, and more patient with myself than I have ever naturally been, and more honest than is always comfortable. I know that when I walk into the Meridian Tower in the morning now, I notice things I didn't used to notice. The quality of the light in the lobby, the sound the elevators make, the smell of the floor cleaner that I have come to associate with the beginning of a day that might, at some point between 9 and 5, include 20 minutes on the 17th floor with bad coffee and a woman who looks at me like she's trying to understand. I know that I am not the same person I was last October, and I know, with the particular certainty of someone who has spent a long career learning to tell the difference between a structure that will stand and one that only looks like it will, that this is not going to fall, from whatever city you're listening to this. I want you to know something. It is not too late. Not for this. Not for any of it. The only thing that's ever too late is the version of yourself you decided to stop becoming. Subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this one. You shouldn't have to hear them alone. Hearts. Epilogue. 6 months later. She fixed the elevator again this morning. Elevator B, the original one, always the temperamental one. I was watching from the lobby. When she finished and the doors opened and the system came back online, she looked across the lobby at me. Just for a second. Not a significant look, not a pointed one. Just the kind of look that passes between two people who know each other's mornings. I smiled. She turned back to her panel and made her note and moved on to the next thing. And I took elevator B to the 14th floor, and I sat down at my desk, and I started to work on the blueprint for a building that I think is going to be the best thing I have ever designed. I don't know what she is to me yet. I'm still learning the word. But I know this. She is the reason the building keeps working, and I am not going to take that for granted again. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to stay in the room with what's true. If this story found you at the right moment, you already know why. Share it with someone who needs it.